As we continue our series on looking at Excel and then the different ribbons depending on the version of Excel that you have, let's look at the Formulas tab today. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Digital Innovation Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's get started. As we look at our desktop ribbon, we can see that the Formulas tab is about the fourth tab over, and with the desktop version we do have insert function that looks like its own separate little button, but it's also definitely part of this function library that has a really large auto sum button, recently used, and then several categories of the functions that you might want to use: financial, logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig, and then there are even more functions that you might want to consider. To the right of that, you have defined names that are really nice when you want to use, say, words as opposed to cell references to write formulas. To the right of that, you have formula auditing and even a way to do some troubleshooting with your formulas. And then to the right of that, calculation. Not everyone realizes that it's possible to determine when your workbook is going to actually calculate your formulas. Well, that is the desktop view, but then we also have the online classic ribbon. And with the online classic ribbon, we can see that there is a lot of similarities here. So we have the insert function that starts off the ribbon. We have the big auto sum button. Now, we don't have the recently used button that we did have with the desktop version, but beyond that, financial, logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig, more functions, those all match within this function library. What we are missing, though, is defined names. It's just not there. When we come over to the right, and in the desktop version we have formula auditing, well, there is show formulas here in kind of the upper right of that group, but that's all that we see here within our online version. And then we also have the calculation group and 3 buttons. So while they look a little bit different, it's basically the same choices. Now let's go on and look at our online single line ribbon. And here, remember, everything is going to be a single line. So insert function is now a different shape. It's actually kind of spread out over this ribbon, but it's there. We have the auto sum button, but it's not nearly as big, although it should have a lot of the same choices. To the right of that, we have the buttons for the function library, and these match. We have financial, logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig, and then more. It's just that they don't have the names, so it's a little harder to figure out. Now this matches show formulas. That is also on the other online version of the ribbon. So again, it skips defined names as a possibility within this ribbon. And then we have the calculation options, and these take up most of the rest of the space here on this ribbon. But the calculation options now have a different kind of drop down, but we also have calculate workbook and calculate sheet, so those do match. We have some things that are matching perfectly, but we are also missing one whole group and some other buttons as well when we compare our desktop version of Excel with our online version. Now let's start looking at each one of the groups on the ribbon individually so that we can get a good comparison. And let's start with the function library. Starting at the top, of course, we have desktop, and we can even see more easily now all of the different buttons. And we know that recently used is the one button that the other groups don't have. And then as we compare the look of the other buttons, financial here with the online classic ribbon, logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig, more functions. Those buttons, at least the look of them, is very similar. Now, when we come down to the online single ribbon, that is where things look a little different. It's interesting that we don't have the names of the buttons as they appear with the other ribbons, but we certainly have AutoSum and financial, logical, text, date and time, lookup and reference, math and trig, and more functions. It's just, it would be really helpful to have those names, but we're not really missing anything except for recently used. So let's take a peek at recently used so we can get an idea if that is something we want to have when we work with functions in Excel. When I click the recently used drop down, I can see that these are the functions that I have recently used, and Excel should keep track of those. If you haven't really played with functions a whole lot, then it will probably just give you a default list of some of the more popular or some of the most used kinds of functions. So, for example, sum should be there, or average, or count A, some of those. But I've actually been looking at if, and then I've looked at a random between, and an or, and an and then some database functions. And so it has kept track of those for several months, waiting for me to use those functions again. Now I also have an insert function button here as well. And so it's kind of a shortcut. If I'm already looking at recently used and I don't find what I'm looking for, I might decide to use this insert function button as opposed to, say, this insert function button that is on the ribbon. While we're here, let's also look at the More Functions buttons drop down so we can see what else is possible, because these are simply more categories of different kinds of buttons we might want to look at. So statistical, engineering, cube, information, compatibility, web. And so these are more possibilities, and yet there may even be some more functions that aren't listed here at all, and you would need to use the Insert Function button to find them. The next group on the ribbon is defined names, and as we discovered earlier, there is no version of defined names within the online classic ribbon or with the online single ribbon. Defined names can be just really helpful, especially if you work with someone who isn't as familiar with Excel and spreadsheets in general. Instead of using cell references that would calculate the sales from your company, for example, and then also calculate the expenses for that same time period, and then determine a profit, you could use those names. So you would take the range of cells that are the expenses, for example, and actually name it expenses. And so your formulas then are very much more readable for those who are not as comfortable with cell references. As we compare the formula auditing group from the desktop version and then look at the online version or the online single ribbon, we can see that we also have several troubleshooting techniques that don't appear on the online versions of the ribbon. So trace precedence, trace dependence, and then removing those arrows after you figure out what the precedence and dependence are is just not there. Show formulas, though, is, and this is a very helpful button in that you sometimes want to look at the underlying formulas in a spreadsheet, and this simply hides the answers to those formulas and shows you the formulas. While you may not use the Show Formulas button a lot, there comes a time where you would like to, first of all, know where all the formulas are in your spreadsheet. And what Show Formulas does is it hides the answers and it only really shows the formulas. You can still do this by using Control and the tilde button, but this Show Formulas button is so much more easy to find and easy to use. So Show Formulas shows you all of the formulas in your spreadsheet, and it's a great tool that you may want to use. Now let's look at the last group of buttons in the Formulas tab. And as we look at it, all of the options are very similar. So for example, with the desktop, we have calculation options, calculate now, and calculate sheet. With the Online Classic ribbon, we also have calculation options. We'll look at those, but they are exactly the same as the ones with desktop. You can calculate the entire workbook, or you can calculate the sheet. Now, calculate workbook and calculate now with the desktop are the same thing. And then with the single line ribbon, we again have the calculation options. It's just that now we have a different kind of look to the drop down, but it's exactly the same as what we see with desktop and Online Classic. We can calculate the workbook, so that indeed matches the online version, and then calculate the sheet. Many people don't realize that when you have a really large workbook, you can say, I want to manually calculate the workbook so that every time I open it, it doesn't run through thousands of formulas and take a long time to open. You can determine when you want to update the answers to your spreadsheet or even spreadsheets in your workbook by using these calculation buttons. Now, let's look at the calculation options drop-down so we can see what those options are. Let's look at calculation options from the desktop. I'm going to click on the drop-down here, and calculations for the most part. And probably what we just assume is that they are automatic. Now, if you have a large data table, which is just a whole lot of information, then you may say, I want to manually do those so that I can open up the rest of my workbook and work on spreadsheets that don't have those data tables, so it doesn't take so long to open that workbook. And then here, if you say manual, this is where you can say, okay, now I'm going to manually go ahead and update the formulas for the data tables. So this manual choice, even though a lot of people don't even know that it's there, is how we can turn off automatic and still get the answers updated by using this button in the calculation options. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.